They weren't producers, they were cleaners with million-dollar budgets. That's how one Hollywood insider once described the men behind the curtain, the ones who didn't just make films, but made scandals vanish. In a town built on illusions, who really held the power to silence police, press, and even the victims themselves. What secrets were too dangerous to reach the silver screen? By the end of this story, you'll understand why some names stayed out of headlines, but never out of the shadows. Eddie Mannix. If anyone personified the phrase, "Hollywood has no rules, just handlers," it was Eddie Mannix. Behind the glittering marquees of MGM during its heyday lurked a man whose job wasn't to make movies. It was to keep them from falling apart under scandal. Mannix wasn't a producer in the traditional sense. He was MGM's fixer, the man Louis B. Mayer relied on when stars got too drunk, too violent, too dead, or too pregnant. His role was to erase problems, silence victims, and keep the studio's illusion of glamour intact. Mannix didn't just call in favors. He called in the police, the press, the priests, and on occasion, organized crime. If an actress got pregnant out of wedlock, Mannix would arrange a quiet abortion or force a quick marriage. If a major star was caught in an affair, Mannix would pay off tabloids or spin up a counter story. If someone died under suspicious circumstances, well, Mannix had ways of making that story disappear, too. The most infamous case he's linked to is the mysterious death of George Reeves, TV's original Superman. Reeves died from a gunshot wound in 1959, officially a suicide, but whispers still echoed today, suggesting Mannix had the power to shut down any deeper probe. Why? Because Reeves had been romantically involved with Toni Mannix, Eddie's wife. It wasn't just about saving the studio's reputation, it was about protecting his own. Mannix operated with near-legal immunity. His connections with law enforcement and the press were ironclad. Journalists knew better than to cross him. He could end careers with a phone call. Behind closed doors, stars lived in fear of a visit from Eddie, because it usually meant your scandal was being handled or you were being disappeared from the studio's future plans altogether. In the public eye, MGM was a dream factory. Behind the scenes, it was a machine powered by silence, cover-ups, and damage control, and Mannix was the one greasing the gears. He didn't just hide crimes, he institutionalized the practice. The myth of old Hollywood as glamorous and untouched? That fantasy has Eddie Mannix's fingerprints all over it. Howard Strickling. If Eddie Mannix was MGM's muscle, Howard Strickling was its mouthpiece. Officially, the studio's head of publicity, Strickling's true role was far more insidious. He wasn't just controlling the narrative, he was crafting it from lies, erasures, and expertly staged illusions. From the 1930s through the 1950s, Strickling managed a department that turned scandal into silence. He didn't hide from the truth, he buried it. Strickling worked side by side with Mannix, forming what some insiders referred to as MGM's damage control department. Their job wasn't to protect the stars, it was to protect the studio brand. And Strickling understood one thing perfectly. Perception was everything. He fed tabloids false stories, coached actors on what to say when reporters came knocking, and had an uncanny ability to turn the most damning situations into heartwarming PR miracles. Take Loretta Young's pregnancy by Clark Gable. The child, born out of wedlock, could have ended both stars' careers. Strickling masterminded a story where Young adopted her own child, and the truth remained hidden for decades. He repeated similar tactics with Judy Garland, Lana Turner, and Jean Harlow, suppressing abortions, hiding addictions, and coordinating breakups in marriages like a chess master sacrificing pawns. He also weaponized the media. Reporters who asked the wrong questions found themselves blacklisted. Photographers who snapped the wrong angle saw their film mysteriously destroyed. Studio-friendly columnists like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons were Strickling's greatest tools, shaping public opinion with whatever spin he fed them, and they rarely asked for proof. What made Strickling especially dangerous was his calm demeanor. While Mannix operated in the shadows, Strickling was all charm and smiles, whispering lies into the ears of America. Under his guidance, MGM not only ruled the box office, it dominated the truth. Careers were saved, reputations preserved, and crimes hidden, all with a press release and a handshake. Howard Strickling may not have ordered the cleanups, but he made sure no one ever heard about them. His legacy isn't just one of cover-ups, it's one of reinvention. Hollywood didn't just bury its secrets. Thanks to Strickling, it dressed them up and made them profitable. Joseph Shank. Joseph Shank was a towering figure in early Hollywood, co-founder of 20th Century Pictures, which became 20th Century Fox, and one of the most influential behind-the-scenes producers of the 1930s and 40s. But while his name is often buried beneath flashier moguls like Mayer or Warner, Shank had a reach that extended far beyond studios and deep into political and criminal networks. And when it came to hiding crimes that threatened the industry's image, he was both participant and protector. Shank was known as a brilliant deal-maker. He helped launch the careers of stars like Marilyn Monroe and held close relationships with mob-connected unions and fixers. In 1941, he was convicted of income tax evasion, part of a wider federal investigation into organized crime's growing influence in Hollywood. But the real story wasn't just about tax fraud. It was about what that conviction almost revealed. During his trial, documents suggested that Shank had been quietly paying off mob figures for years to ensure labor peace on studio lots. The FBI suspected the payments also bought silence and muscle when problems arose. After serving a short prison sentence, suspiciously short, according to critics, Shank was swiftly pardoned by President Harry Truman, a move that raised eyebrows in both Washington and Hollywood. Some historians believe this pardon was influenced by powerful friends in the industry who feared what Shank might say if he was left behind bars for too long. But Shank's influence wasn't limited to mob connections. He was also part of the internal machinery that managed scandals. When actresses got pregnant out of wedlock, when drug arrests threatened to reach the headlines, Shank helped ensure the stories disappeared. Like his peers, he worked with fixers and trusted press contacts to keep reputations intact. Shank's legacy is often forgotten, overshadowed by louder legends. But in the backrooms of Golden Age Hollywood, he was the man who pulled strings, erased damage, and made sure the myth of Hollywood stayed mythic, no matter the cost. Louis B. Mayer. Louis B. Mayer wasn't just the head of MGM, he was its godfather. For over 3 decades, Mayer crafted an empire built on glitz, dreams, and iron-fisted control. His name was associated with elegance, family values, and American exceptionalism. But beneath that patriarchal image was a man who orchestrated one of Hollywood's most extensive networks of moral suppression, legal manipulation, and institutionalized silence. Mayer didn't merely run a studio, he ran lives. Every major star under MGM's banner, from Judy Garland to Jean Harlow, was contractually bound not just by salary, but by image. And when those images began to crack due to addiction, abuse, pregnancies, affairs, or breakdowns, Mayer took control. He didn't flinch from hiding criminal activity if it meant saving face for the studio. Take Judy Garland's adolescence, for example. Mayer supervised a brutal regime where teenage Judy was fed amphetamines to keep her weight down and sedatives to sleep. He saw her pain, but kept the machine running. When actors attempted suicide or spiraled into addiction, Mayer didn't offer rehabilitation. He demanded secrecy. That meant shipping stars off to sanitariums or staging glamorous vacations to distract the press. Mayer also used a covert system of informants. Studio chauffeurs, maids, and assistants were often instructed to report back anything compromising about the stars. Once a potential scandal surfaced, Mayer summoned Strickling and Manx to clean it up. He'd offer hush money, arrange marriages, threaten reporters, or simply fire the offending party, no matter how talented they were. Even serious crimes were swept away. Assaults, forced abortions, and sexual harassment cases never reached courtrooms under Mayer's watch. His logic was simple. Audiences didn't pay to see flawed humans, they paid to see fantasies. And he would protect those fantasies at all costs. What made Mayer's influence so dangerous was the culture it cemented. He created a blueprint where producers weren't just bosses, they were puppet masters. Stars became commodities, victims became liabilities, the studio became the law. Louis B. Mayer is still remembered as one of the founding fathers of American cinema. But the world he helped build thrived on exploitation and silence. His legacy isn't just Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz, it's the unmarked graves of the stories he made disappear. Harry Conn. At Columbia Pictures, Harry Conn was both feared and indispensable. A tyrant behind closed doors and a polished executive in public, Conn's reign was marked by an ironclad insistence on control over budgets, over stars, and over the truth. While he helped build Columbia into one of the most profitable studios of the 1930s and 40s, Conn also ran his operation like a personal fiefdom, complete with whispered mob ties and an uncanny ability to bury anything that threatened the studio's image. Conn's name was often linked to organized crime, not as a direct participant, but as someone who maintained close friendships with figures like Johnny Rosselli, a Chicago mobster with deep connections in Hollywood's labor unions and nightclubs. These relationships gave Conn leverage, especially when dealing with rebellious stars or inconvenient scandals. If someone got too loud or too bold, they were silenced, either by threat, by smear, or by sudden unemployment. Actresses under contract at Columbia were particularly vulnerable. Several alleged that Conn would demand sexual favors in exchange for roles, a practice that insiders referred to as casting by couch. Yet these stories rarely surfaced in the press. Conn made sure of that. He had journalists on the payroll, gossip columnists in his pocket, and lawyers on standby. If a story looked like it might leak, it was buried before it ever reached the second draft. When Columbia actress Jean Seberg was targeted by the FBI in the late 1960s, decades after Conn's peak, many industry veterans recalled how Conn's earlier era had normalized institutional silence. Seberg's public breakdown and the suppression of her political views were eerily reminiscent of how Conn once crushed dissent and erased scandal under the guise of studio protection. What makes Conn's story so haunting is how effective he was. He wasn't beloved, he was feared. Even his funeral was famously packed, not with mourners, but with people wanting to make sure he was really dead. Yet for all his cruelty, Conn kept Columbia out of most headline scandals during his tenure. Crimes happened, voices were silenced, and careers were manipulated, but the headlines stayed clean. In the brutal calculus of old Hollywood, Harry Conn understood something others pretended not to. Image wasn't everything, it was the only thing, and he'd destroy anything that threatened it. David O Selnik. David O Selnik is best remembered as the visionary producer behind Gone with the Wind, the man who turned epic storytelling into an art form. But behind his polished image as a cinematic genius was a meticulous manipulator, one who didn't just control what went on screen, but also what stayed off it. Selnik was obsessed with preserving illusions. Whether it was a film's narrative or a star's public persona, he micromanaged everything to ensure that no whiff of scandal ever reached the audience. Selnik operated differently from the more brutish studio bosses like Mayer or Conn. His approach was psychological. He kept his stars emotionally tethered, creating a toxic blend of mentorship, control, and dependency. Nowhere was this more apparent than in his relationship with actress Jennifer Jones. After casting her in The Song of Bernadette, Selnik became not just her manager, but her lover, later leaving his wife Irene Mayer, daughter of Louis B. Mayer, to marry Jones. But the real scandal lay in how Selnik shaped Jones's image, filtering interviews, controlling press access, and even reportedly suppressing rumors of affairs or emotional breakdowns to preserve her marketability. He also had a hand in silencing darker incidents involving his productions. During the making of Gone with the Wind, Selnik ignored allegations of mistreatment among extras, particularly black performers, and worked hard to keep any accusations away from the press. He took immense care in crafting his studio's public image, often hiring private detectives to monitor employees and flag potential leaks. One former associate later claimed that Selnik had a file on everyone. Selnik also meddled with medical decisions affecting his actors. There were whispered accounts of him urging doctors to prescribe diet pills to keep actresses thin, or to manage nervous breakdowns with sedation rather than public hospitalizations. Mental health issues were buried under layers of makeup and red carpet appearances. And when stars couldn't perform, Selnik was quick to cut them loose and bury the reasons under carefully worded press statements. His control didn't stop at the studio gates. He orchestrated marriages and divorces, played matchmaker when it served publicity, and even advised stars on how to conduct themselves during police investigations. For Selnik, everything was a production, even real life, and he demanded a flawless performance. David O. Selznick's films remain legendary, but the lengths he went to in protecting the illusion of Hollywood stardom reveal a producer who didn't just make movies, he made reality disappear. Jack Warner. Jack Warner, the legendary co-founder of Warner Brothers, was a titan of early Hollywood, a master of spectacle, a ruthless businessman, and a man who didn't mind rewriting truth to protect his empire. Under his leadership, Warner Brothers became known for its gritty, working-class dramas, but the reality inside the studio was far more cutthroat. Warner was not only known for betraying colleagues, blacklisting dissenters, and exploiting talent, he also became one of the most powerful silencers in the industry. And when it came to hiding crimes that could tarnish the studio's brand, Jack Warner didn't hesitate. Warner ran his studio like a personal kingdom. He installed surveillance measures, eavesdropped on staff, and demanded personal loyalty above all else. According to multiple biographies, including Jack L. Warner, The Last Mogul by Bob Thomas, the producer wasn't above using private detectives to dig into the personal lives of actors and actresses, not to help them, but to hold leverage over them. He knew who was drinking too much, who was having affairs, and who had criminal complaints hovering just out of view. He used that knowledge to enforce silence. When actor Errol Flynn faced statutory rape charges in 1942, Warner went into overdrive to control the narrative. Though Flynn was ultimately acquitted, studio intervention is widely believed to have shaped public perception. Warner worked closely with defense attorneys and fed selective details to sympathetic press outlets. Meanwhile, any coverage that painted Flynn in a negative light mysteriously vanished from the pages of newspapers across Los Angeles. But Warner's interference extended beyond stars. He had deals with local police and city officials, financial support, and studio favors in exchange for legal leniency. When contract players were arrested for drunk driving, disorderly conduct, or worse, the studio's legal team swooped in to erase the record. One Warner publicist, years after retirement, claimed that the studio's influence over City Hall was so deep they could make a felony vanish like cigarette smoke. He also exploited the House Un-American Activities Committee hearings during the Red Scare, not to protect the studio from controversy, but to eliminate creative voices he didn't like. Writers and actors who stepped out of line politically were painted as communists and handed to the blacklist, while others, those with criminal records or abusive reputations, were protected if they brought in box office gold. Jack Warner didn't care about truth or justice. He cared about control. And as long as the studio lights stayed bright and the money kept flowing, he was more than willing to let the darker truths die in the shadows. Samuel Goldwin. Samuel Goldwin is often portrayed as the kinder, classier mogul of Hollywood's early days, more polished than Louis B. Mayer, less brutal than Harry Conn. Known for his eloquent quips and passion for artistic filmmaking, Goldwyn's public image was that of a refined producer with integrity. But beneath that charm lay a calculated operator who understood the value of silence. He may not have pulled the strings himself as aggressively as his peers, but he certainly benefited from and allowed an industry-wide culture of secrecy and complicity to flourish under his watch. Goldwyn's greatest skill was avoidance. While scandals raged across rival studios, Goldwyn rarely found his name in the gossip columns. That wasn't due to a lack of controversy, but because he perfected the art of preemptive image control. He often distanced himself publicly from problem stars while quietly negotiating settlements and hush money behind the scenes. Unlike Mayer or Warner, Goldwyn preferred not to get his hands dirty, but he still ensured someone else took care of the mess. Take the case of actress Anna Sten, a Russian star Goldwyn promoted aggressively as the next Garbo. When her career floundered and reports of on-set breakdowns surfaced, Goldwyn arranged for her to quietly leave Hollywood rather than risk further embarrassment. The reasons were buried, the headlines sanitized. It became his signature move: remove the problem and erase the trace. He also had a reputation for tolerating troubling behavior as long as it didn't reach the public. Some of Goldwyn's collaborators, including directors and producers, were known for abusive temperaments, extramarital scandals, or behind-the-scenes drug use. Goldwyn's method was simple: keep it quiet, keep them working, and keep the cameras rolling. Problems were addressed through private warnings or backdoor deals with lawyers and the press. Goldwyn's clean reputation was, in itself, a carefully managed illusion. He cultivated friendly relationships with major newspaper editors and gossip columnists, many of whom were provided with exclusive access in exchange for favorable coverage or the suppression of damaging rumors. It was PR diplomacy, and Goldwyn was a master diplomat. While he wasn't as openly tyrannical as his counterparts, Samuel Goldwin still operated within and reinforced a system built to conceal. In the golden era of Hollywood, silence was power. And Goldwin, ever the gentleman, understood exactly how much a quiet smile and a sealed envelope could buy. Daryl F Xanuk. Daryl F Xanuk was the mastermind behind many of 20th Century Fox's biggest successes, a producer of vision, precision, and prestige. But while his studio churned out classics like The Grapes of Wrath and All About Eve, behind closed doors, Xanuk's personal life and studio practices were laced with exploitation, intimidation, and cover-ups. He wasn't just aware of Hollywood's criminal underbelly, he was a part of it. Xanuk developed a reputation for using his casting couch like a second office. Dozens of actresses, from starlets to unknown hopefuls, were allegedly summoned to his private suite under the pretense of auditions. What happened behind those closed doors was kept quiet, but not unknowable. The stories circulated among studio employees, whispered about but never publicly challenged. Xanuk's power was too great. He was a kingmaker and a career breaker. Studio secretaries and assistants were instructed to schedule meetings late in the evening, often inappropriately framed as private rehearsals. Those who resisted or tried to speak up were blacklisted, reassigned, or quietly dropped from contracts. Xanuk ensured their silence through intimidation, and if that didn't work, his legal team took over with threats of defamation suits or financial ruin. The press, as always, remained complicit, thanks to a steady flow of exclusives and advertising dollars. When accusations did emerge, through anonymous tips or backstage gossip, Xanuk deployed the studio's powerful publicity machine to discredit the accuser. In one incident, a young actress who tried to expose his misconduct was painted in the media as emotionally unstable and unprofessional. Her career ended, Xanuk's thrived, but Xanuk's cover-ups extended beyond sexual exploitation. Like other producers of his era, he had ties to law enforcement and city officials. When brawls, DUIs, or domestic abuse allegations surfaced involving his talent, they were handled quietly, police reports buried, headlines redirected, reputations salvaged. He even helped manage the fallout when actor Tyrone Power's bisexuality became a potential scandal, carefully controlling press coverage and shaping Power's romantic public image through manufactured relationships. Despite the darkness surrounding his private life, Xanuk received high praise for championing socially conscious films. But the irony is inescapable. A man who produced films about justice and integrity was simultaneously silencing victims and burying the truth. Daryl F Xanuk's legacy is a cautionary tale. He built an empire on prestige, but it was propped up by fear, manipulation, and the belief that as long as the cameras kept rolling, everything else could be rewritten. Marvin Leroy. Marvin Leroy isn't a name that usually appears alongside the more tyrannical titans of old Hollywood. Best known as the producer of The Wizard of Oz and Mr. Roberts, Leroy's public persona was that of a polished showman, creative, collaborative, and clean. But beneath that reputation was a quieter truth. Leroy was no stranger to the Hollywood culture of concealment. He may not have orchestrated cover-ups as blatantly as Manx or Warner, but he was part of the machine that made them possible. And when the studio needed someone to protect the brand, Leroy was a willing collaborator. Leroy got his start under the wing of Harry Warner and was eventually promoted to producer and director at Warner Brothers before moving to MGM, where his reputation blossomed. Yet, in both environments, he proved remarkably adept at managing problems that threatened productions, whether those were star breakdowns, criminal accusations, or incidents that risked moral outrage from the public. And in classic Hollywood, when a scandal arose, silence wasn't just the default, it was demanded. One of the most striking examples of Leroy's complicity involved Judy Garland. As producer of The Wizard of Oz, he worked in close proximity to a teenage Garland who was being force-fed pills to control her weight and energy levels. The abuse she suffered was known to many around her, including Leroy, but nothing was done. He continued working on the project, continuing production and preserving the studio's investment while Garland's health deteriorated. Leroy also had a hand in protecting Clark Gable's reputation during a series of damaging incidents. When Gable allegedly struck a journalist who made remarks about his romantic life, it was Leroy who helped smooth over the incident, pressuring the studio to keep it quiet and avoid further inquiry. The journalist dropped the story. Gable's image remained untarnished. In another instance, when one of MGM's contracted actors was arrested on morals charges, Leroy reportedly contacted studio legal counsel before the police even issued a statement. Within 48 hours, the charges were dropped and the actor was sent abroad for vacation. The studio's explanation to the press was coordinated by Leroy's publicity contacts, ensuring that the matter never reached the tabloids. Leroy also used his friendly rapport with gossip columnists to redirect stories. When a story about a leading man's bisexuality threatened to surface, Leroy allegedly arranged for a counter-narrative involving a female co-star to be fed to Luella Parsons. It worked. The story never ran, and the fake romance ran in papers nationwide. Marvin Leroy didn't yell, threaten, or bribe as openly as others, but he played the game. He understood the rules, kept his hands clean, and let others take the fall. In the shadows of Hollywood's golden glow, he made sure the secret stayed buried, quietly, efficiently, and permanently. For decades, Hollywood sold fantasy while hiding reality. These producers weren't just moguls, they were gatekeepers of truth, deciding which lives were worth saving and which crimes were worth covering. Behind every red carpet was a buried scandal, every spotlight casting shadows no one dared explore. But history doesn't stay silent forever. The myths they built are finally cracking, and what's underneath tells a far darker story. Stick around, because the truth Hollywood tried to bury is finally taking center stage,